Don't you just love it when you can set out across the sea with a good friend at your side, exploring new, untamed islands? Do you know what, Kapp'n, old pal? Who even needs you? I'll do it myself. Today, we're going to throw caution to the wind, live the dream, and fit 2 villagers in Kapp'n's boat. For this project, we'll mainly be using Fimo, or as other people maybe like to say, Fimo. I look forward to hearing from you pronunciation experts in the comments. So we'll start off with this, what can only reasonably be called nightmare fuel, and try to make it a little bit less nightmarish by adding some eyes. Now I know villagers don't typically have eyebrows in Animal Crossing, but like any hot-blooded male, I like me some eyebrows. From watching other crafting YouTubers, I know that if you smash 2 bits of polymer clay together, that they magically blend into one awesome colour. Let's see if we can do it. What'd you know? It works! After realising I'd made far too much, I halved that bad boy and got to work on the hair. And yes, I know, this is not the prettiest sculpting you've seen in the world. But just like in real life, if you hide your mistakes, they didn't happen. I wanted to replicate that kind of wavy hair effect that you can pick in Animal Crossing. So I decided to use individual bits of clay to try and get those individual waves. So after shaping it, smoothing it off with some turpentine, and then baking it, I realised something. I really hate it. But iteration is the spice of life, or at least so I'm told. Personally, I hate having to do anything twice. So begrudgingly, I started again. This time around, I decided to use just 1 piece of polymer clay and shape it as I went along to give it those waves. And after a while, I looked at it and I thought, it's alright. Then it was just a matter of putting some green clay over that big brain, then using an old paintbrush to give it some texture, adding a few more details, and voila, un béret, or a beret. That's French. Now, a beautiful head needs a beautiful body, or at the very least an adequate one. So using armature wire, I made a basic skeleton, and then put it roughly in the pose that I wanted it. I need a Sharpie. Where did I put my Sharpie? Our good lady here is going to be sitting down in the boat, so I wanted to mark roughly where her knees and hips would be, so I could bend them later. This blue nappy, or for our American friends, this blue diaper, will turn off-screen magically into a pair of jeans. Then it was time to move on to the blouse, which secretly, or not so secretly, I'd been dreading. Why? You'll see in a moment. You see, I really like making easy things, but I don't often give myself that luxury. So I decided to pick from Animal Crossing, out of all the clothing you could pick, one that had a multicolour crisscross pattern that required a steady hand to paint multiple little lines. Once I'd showered and changed my clothes to clean off the stench of stress and sweat, I moved on to making some teeny tiny pirate boots. Hold up a second, let's see that again.
Nice curling.
Due to the chibi nature of the villages in Animal Crossing, their big brains tend to be a little bit too heavy for their body. Our good lady here needed some extra support, so I decided to make her a little green backpack. Cute! This chappie, although being very handsome, also suffered from the same Darth Vader cranial issue as villager number 1. I like the Dark Lord of the Sith as much as any guy, but it's not really the aesthetic I'm going for. So I also gave him a nice head of hair. He's looking a little bit too Corey Feldman for my liking. That's better. At this point, I'm sure you're thinking, do I really need another self-deprecating, sarcastic, dry-witted, hobbycrafting, geeky YouTuber? So what separates me and those far more talented YouTubers? Perhaps 2 things come to mind. This is my first crafting project of this type, which I'm sure you're not surprised at. And 2, I'm British, which means that any sarcasm and dry wit absolutely 100% comes from my heart. Anyway, it looks like we're missing some details on Villager Bee here. To help us with this, I have summoned the acrylic paint pens, which I cannot recommend enough. It's like painting, except with a pen instead of a brush. With the golden thread sorted, there was nothing left to do but to recapitate our villager. Remember when I said we could do without Kapp'n? Well, turns out we need someone to drive the boat. This was my first attempt at Kapp'n, and I can only apologise for what you're seeing. Here's the second version. After baking a strip of clay, then cutting it into those weird triangle shaped things that go on the top of Kapp'n's head, I stuck them on with some super glue. Since this is my own version of Kapp'n, I wanted to give him a bit of history that you could visualize and see on his face, so I gave him some warts and some scarring. Perhaps he'd been in a few bash-ups when he was younger, maybe even got involved in some pirating and plundering in his younger years. With Kapp'n's new head all ready to go, there was only one thing left to do. Since Kapp'n's flailing headless body was too much for me to take, I reattached the new one, and with Kapp'n safely reanimated, I finally gave him and the other villagers a top coat with a matte varnish. Now, let's talk about the boat-sized elephant in the room. I don't actually have any footage of me making the boat. You see, I decided to make this video halfway through the project, but I do have some work-in-progress photos. That's just as good, right? To make the boat, I used a combination of balsa wood and wall filler to fill in the gaps and smooth it off. Then I painted it using acrylic paints and sealed it using an acrylic varnish. With the boat and the villagers out of the way, it was finally time to move on to the resin base, which turned out to be a masterclass on how not to make resin bases. I wanted to give a suggestion of that kind of rounded, sloped world we see in Animal Crossing. I started to make a cardboard master of my rounded ocean. I quickly realised I needed a large indentation for where I wanted the boat to sit, so I measured and drew where I wanted to place it, and then started to cut it out. Then it dawned on me, I have no idea what I'm doing. But finally, after messing around for several hours with more cardboard, air dry clay and wall filler, I ended up with this. Then it was on to making the silicone mold. Being on a tight budget, I decided it best to order some cheap mold making silicone from Amazon. It turned out it wasn't so bad, but it had one fundamental flaw. I didn't have enough of it. I quickly had to improvise and grab what I had to hand. After wedging in a bunch of Lego as the silicone cured, I finally managed to raise the levels just enough to make a mold. Then using a budget-friendly 2-part clear resin, I mixed it with a bit of blue acrylic paint to give it that ocean look, poured it in, and left it to cure. And after 24 hours this came out. And just like my mama said at my birth, even the biggest mistakes can sometimes come out okay. Continuing the time-honoured tradition of using clear Mod Podge on resin water, I slapped a load on to create some waves. While that was drying, I went about making a base for the resin base. Then I slapped on some more Mod Podge mixed with white acrylic paint to replicate the foam thrown up by the boat. Using more balsa wood, I made a frame to go around the ocean. Then finally, using some cotton wool to replicate the wake of the boat, and then covering that in UV resin, we were done. It was time to take it off of the workbench and put it into the lightbox. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more, please consider subscribing and clicking that like button. See you next time at the Rookie's Workbench.